Teilnehmerzahlen noch.
Hi everyone, I'm going to start talking just for a while people are coming into the webinar. I want to take the opportunity to say thank you for everyone participating tonight in our webinar, LNG, the dark side of the boom.
We have a lot of interest in this webinar talking about LNG and the dark side of the boom. Now that the numbers are still increasing, but slowly, I might as well start with the official part. Ich spreche jetzt auf Deutsch und dieses.
I'm going to speak German today, but we have translation available. Depending on which app you're using, you can find it through the three little dots. That's what it looks like for me, or maybe it's a little globe icon where you can select your language channel.
We do have translation German to English because in the end I will be speaking in German. So if you look in your app, in my app, it's three little dots in the upper right end, and there you'll find a little globe saying translation. And then you can choose the English channel. But now I'll go forward in German. Also, erst nochmal ganz herzlichen Dank an unsere.
Okay, once again, thank you so much to all our speakers today. Thank you so much for being willing to do this webinar together with us. We have Lng GHEORGHIU. Some of you might have met him. He's been active on methane emissions for a long time. He works on environmental policy and pollution. We have James HIATT from the Louisiana Bucket Brigade from the United States. Thank you so much for being here today. And we have Elida CASTILLO from Chispa in Texas, I think. She's been working on this for a long time as well, and she's going to tell us about the situation on the ground. This webinar is being recorded, so if you have a question, you can ask it through the question and answer tool. If you don't want people to see your name, just rename yourself. Give yourself a random name. Call yourself Mickey Mouse, whatever you like. We've switched off cameras and microphones for everyone except for the speakers, just to make sure everything runs smoothly. We've had a couple of issues in the past. A few housekeeping notes. We have the chat feature, but you can only chat to the organizers and the hosts. So please only use the chat feature for technical issues. If you can't hear us, if you can't find the translation button, things like that. If you have any questions to our speakers, please use the Q&A tool. You can find it at the bottom. There's a little bar. And you have the option to ask your own questions, or you can give thumbs up to other people's questions if you believe they are important, so they get ranked higher. We're probably not going to be able to answer every single question, so we're going to make sure to ask those questions that are most relevant for everyone. If you want to see the questions, usually the highest ranked questions should be at the top, but feel free to scroll down, or you can change the view. You can also sort them by newest first. Sometimes newer questions get lost, so that's a nice way to do it as well. We're going to speak German and English today. We have translation. Both channels are being recorded, so you can watch them again later if you want. And as I said, you can access translation through the three little dots, or maybe, depending on your app version, through the globe icon. We're going to start today with Lng GHEORGHIU, and he's going to give us an introduction overview of the topic, and he's going to talk about his personal experience as well. He has quite an interesting biography. I know that it was you actually made me start thinking about methane emissions. I think it was, we met in the German parliament maybe 8 years ago, I think, and you mentioned it to me. The fact that methane is so much more harmful as a greenhouse gas. I wasn't aware of it, and that was the moment I started really thinking about it. And now I'm fighting in the European Parliament to make sure we have strong regulations, we get stronger regulations for methane emissions. And I have to say, it's not looking terrible at the moment. We are hopeful. So that's 10 minutes. Then we have 10 minutes for Elida from Texas, and then 10 minutes for James. After that, we want to have about 45 minutes for questions and answers. And then all three of our speakers will give a final statement. Maybe I'm going to say a few words just to summarize everything and tell you a bit about the process, what's going on at the European level. Okay, sorry for talking so much. Again, thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you to our speakers for being here. Thank you for doing this. And thank you for everyone participating, for everyone taking an interest. We are happy to see so many of you. There's so much misinformation going around on this issue, so it's really important. Okay, over to Andy. Thank you so much, Jutta. And again, thank you to you and your team for organizing this event, for giving us the opportunity to talk about the dark side of the boom. I'm not going to talk about my CV. I only have 10 minutes to speak. But just to give you a few facts, I work as a policy advisor. I'm a freelancer. I work on environmental policy, and I fight against fracking, anything to do with gas, methane, LNG. So the topic is being much discussed at the moment, which is a good thing, but also the gas industry is trying to use the opportunity to make us even more dependent on fossil fuels. So it's especially important right now to use all the tools available to us to prevent harm. Maybe the methane regulation is going to help with that, but we also need to prevent new infrastructural projects, and we need to reduce trade with liquid gas and prevent fracking. Okay, sorry, that was my email, but now you can see my presentation. My job tonight is to give you a very quick overview about the background, about the US-EU LNG trade, also talk about why LNG is such an issue for the environment. And if I have enough time, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the very messy situation with LNG in Europe and Germany. So that's a lot to get through in 10 minutes. You might think the US LNG trade with Europe and with Germany in particular might be an issue that started after the war started in Ukraine, or that gained speed after the war. But actually this has been happening for several years, and it started getting stronger in 2018 with the Trump-Juncker deal. The background was that the Trump administration raised levies on automotive products from Germany, or was going to do that. And Europe, in that case, the Commission President Juncker and the German federal government with Mr. Altmaier, they were trying to prevent that from happening, and the core of the deal was that the United States said they wouldn't make them pay the levies, but Europe started importing more LNGs. So the deal for Europe was, the promise at the time was constructing 2 LNG terminals in Germany, and Wilhelmshaven was one of them. And at the time, they also wanted to prevent these tariffs, as I said, and they wanted to avoid sanctions against Nord Stream 2. And that's a really interesting fact, especially from today's perspective. So, looking at the timeline, ever since that meeting, LNG exports to the EU rose dramatically. These are numbers from February this year, so before the war started. Between 2018 and February 2022, the US LNG exports rose by more than 2,000%. And what's really interesting is the United States and Russia are in close competition. They are competing for the European LNG market. Some people might not know this, but Russia is indeed one of the top 3 LNG exporters to the EU, together with the US and Qatar. And that's especially interesting in today's context. Jutta also mentioned the methane regulations, which the European Parliament they have a very clear position on it. They want to regulate methane emissions. So that means the regulation also applies to imports and to importers. And the other thing we need to do is decarbonize our energy system as a whole. Why is LNG such a problem in terms of climate? And why is it so important for the methane regulations and for our current context? The current plan is to import even more LNG from the US with even more fracking, and the problem is methane. These visuals from Professor Howarth compare oil, coal, and natural gas, or LNGs, and the methane emissions they produce. So the problem that you see is the very high methane emissions. The effect of methane in the atmosphere over 20 years is 80 times higher than CO2. And the 20 years is exactly the period that matters. That's the time we have to prevent the absolute worst case in terms of global warming. So the key takeaway from these figures is when you compare it, LNG is the most dangerous of all of these fuels. I'm not trying to promote coal, just to be very clear. But in the situation we are in right now, we need to create awareness. If we continue to pursue LNG, we are promoting global warming, and we have to be aware of that. Why is LNG so high in methane? It has to do with the extraction process, with transport. It's a very involved process, so you have that entire chain from carriers, you have the pipelines, you have liquefaction systems, you have the pipelines. In order to liquefy it, the gas is heated, then it liquefies, and it's transported on carriers, which also creates methane emissions. Then it arrives in the terminal, where it's regasified and then fed into the grid. And this entire journey creates a lot of emissions as well, creating these high methane emissions. The last few slides relate to Germany. So what's happening at the moment? What's the situation? This is the current situation, the current state of play in Germany for LNG from 1979 to February 2022, before the war started. Some people might be surprised to hear 1979. Yes, that was when the first LNG terminal in Wilhelmshaven, when construction was started. And until the beginning of the war, we had investors in 2 other locations. They had entered the debate, that was Brunsbüttel and Stade, and they were not able to make a final investment decision. But then they received that final push in favor of even more LNG infrastructure because Russia attacked Ukraine. And that was that final push. So now we have 3 sites that are firm. The decision has been made. So before the war started, we had 3 onshore terminals in Brunsbüttel, Wilhelmshaven, and Stade. They were being planned, or investors were planning it. The federal government in Germany had promised them subsidies as well. And there was also a plan to create an LNG station, if you will, in the form of a carrier in Rostock. So that was meant to supply carriers. These are the import capacities. So we're talking about roughly 30 billion cubic meters for all three projects together. That's about a third of what we currently consume in Germany. This is the current situation. We still have the three big sites, Brunsbüttel, Wilhelmshaven and Stade, with fixed terminals. Those are still under discussion. Then we have Rostock with the onshore terminal. And then we have several so-called floating facilities, floating storage units. All the terminals you're seeing here are part of the so-called Lng Acceleration Act, which was adopted this year very quickly. There was never a full analysis. There wasn't even a full analysis of the demand. Do we really need all these terminals to provide energy to Germany? And still, these terminals received permission. There is approval. So they consider to be in the public interest to build these terminals. The German government has currently chartered 5 of these floating units at different locations. Brunsbüttel is getting one of them, one of the units. Wilhelmshaven is getting 2 and potentially a third. It has approval, or it's in the act. Stade is getting one of them as well, and Lubmin has another private project as well. So that's being pursued by private investors. The investors and the German government are hoping to be able to receive liquid gas by the end of the year or early next year. It's not certain that's going to work, and James and Elida are going to tell us more because we have the 3 main sites, Brunsbüttel, Wilhelmshaven and Stade, and that is definitely gas extracted through fracking. Brunsbüttel has published their contracts with their investors, so we'll hear more about that later. And all of this is happening at a historical moment, and we need to take this opportunity to focus on decarbonization instead of creating additional infrastructure to such a huge extent. We need to start fighting, and people are fighting here and on the other side of the Atlantic as well. And I'm hoping that our work and the projects Jutta is pursuing in the European Parliament, I hope we'll at least be able to prevent all of these projects from getting built. Thank you so much.
Ja, vielen Dank, Andy, für diese Einführung.
Thank you, Andy, for giving us this really relevant introduction and those historical tidbits as well. I wasn't aware that it's been going on for such a long time. And I don't want to say too much. I'm going to hand over to Elida.
Hello, everybody. My name is Elida CASTILLO. I am the program director for Chispa, Texas, and we are in the Corpus Christi community along the Texas Gulf Coast. I had a presentation, but it's not fully built out, so I will hope to share that with the organizers so that they could send it to you later. I wanted to share, my experience living in a community where we have an LNG export terminal that has signed agreements with the European buyers. And I came into this work pretty much by accident. As I mentioned, I'm in the Corpus Christi area. My role is an organizer. I'm a community organizer, and we have so many different facilities here. I know the topic is LNG, but in my background, I have ExxonMobil SABIC, which is Gulf Coast Growth Ventures. It's a partnership with the ExxonMobil and SABIC, the Saudi Arabian royal family. And as we know, this is a plastics facility, and plastics use a lot of natural gas. But I came into this work, last year. I had the opportunity to travel to Germany, and this is where I met Andy and so many of the organizers who were at that time working against 3 proposed LNG terminals. And I am saddened to hear that those 3 proposed LNG terminals have turned into about 12 or 13 LNG terminals, and that the German government is fast tracking these facilities. These facilities are not just harmful to my community and harmful to the communities where there is fracking, where the fracking actually takes place, but it is going to be harmful to the communities where these LNG facilities are built. There's this notion that LNG, liquefied natural gas, is natural and it's a clean form of energy, but there is nothing natural about fracked gas. The process to frack this takes millions of gallons of water. And in our state, we are having a water crisis. And I imagine it's like that in several other countries. But we are having a water crisis where people are running out of drinking water, and our water tables and water supplies are being poisoned by the practice of fracking. So what happens is, to frack a whale head, they have to go down, thousands. They dig thousands, of feet deep into the Earth's crust, into the shale, and they're exploring if there is natural gas in that. So then once they identify this and they find it, they drill deep holes in this ground, and then they insert millions of gallons of water mixed with toxic chemicals so that they could break apart the shale. And what they do with that wastewater is they dispose of it. Here in Texas, we do not have any laws on the disposal of wastewater. There are no regulators who go and track that this is being done in a way that isn't going to harm our water supplies or groundwater for many of these communities. And these wells, once they are done, with how finding LNG, they just abandon them. There is no regulatory agency that is going out and ensuring a lot of these wellheads are being capped. So we have our water being poisoned, and then you have methane being emitted in this area from these poisoned wellheads. And in the presentation that I will share with you, I have a map of the Odessa area, which is in the Permian Basin. And those maps have grown from just, just very, very little locations of where the fracking is happening to all of those dots represent a fracking site. And this is from 2020. This isn't even a current map in 2022 where that has doubled in size, especially with, the war in Ukraine. We have seen fracking just accelerate how, in a lot of these communities. And I have family in Odessa as well. And many of my family members there have cancer, and they're also, working in these industries. So Odessa recently went through a situation where they didn't have any drinking water because of the infrastructure. So fracking isn't, a practice that should be allowed anywhere. I know it's banned in Germany, and, it should be banned in all these other countries. So there's this continued colonization of communities that, don't have the strict government regulations. And I know that people think America, the USA has strict regulations. The oil and gas industry is going over and telling our European partners that, the way this is extracted, is it a clean way? It is mitigating the risks to the environment. This is not as bad as Russian gas. but the same people who came and developed this practice here have gone to other countries and they have built these LNG facilities in other countries. So that practice is not something that is highly regulated. Here in the US, our oil and gas industries write a lot of the laws. Most recently, we had Senator Manchin pushing for regulations to make this fracking practice or just the energy industry, like they wanted to deregulate a lot of this, these practices so that they can expand and they can, fulfill the requests from our European allies and our Asian buyers and, people all over the country, all over the world. They wanted to be able to fulfill these orders for oil and natural gas without considering like the impacts to the environment. And it breaks my heart to hear that this is something that is happening in Germany, where Germany has like fast-tracked a lot of these facilities because they want to provide heat for the country later on. But you cannot solve this with something that, and take into account like this is happening elsewhere, and it's going to mitigate the risk to the environment. Because like I mentioned, I am new to this space. Jutta, like I wish I had years of experience in this, but here the practice of LNG, the exports really began in 2016. And Cheniere LNG, which is the facility located in Corpus Christi, was just built in 2018 and 2019. And we are currently, contesting an expansion for Train 3. So this practice of exporting LNG from my community is still relatively new. And we are learning a lot of the impacts to the environment. But what we have seen happening in our community is, you can already see the impacts. And on the next slide, I will show like some of the contaminants that are, emitted whenever these flares are happening. So in the very first picture on the presentation, there was a picture of Cheniere LNG, and you had the flare there. This is everything that is emitted into the environment when these facilities flare. And unfortunately, these facilities flare every day, and they do not alert our communities. So you have thousands of pounds of carbon monoxide, of ethane, ethylene, hydrogen sulfide, isobutane, isopentane, methane, butane, pentane, nitrogen, like NOx, propane, sulfur dioxide, and VOCs unclassified. But what I also have seen from this is like a lot of people in our community are now asking, why is there so much cancer? Every day on my social media, I always see somebody who is holding a medical benefit because unfortunately in our country, we don't have an adequate healthcare system. And so people have to pay for insurance or they don't have insurance. And so these facilities come into our communities promising that they're going to make our quality of life better when they bring these pollutants, these contaminants, and they make our quality of life worse. We have seen our coastline erode at accelerated rates. We have seen seagrasses, acres of seagrasses being killed, which is really vital to our community, especially as a Gulf community. We rely on fishing and, just recreation in our Gulf. But with the amount of exports that have been going out, we have seen, this coastal erosion and the killing of our seagrasses and our, vital aquatic system. Those have been reduced tremendously. And unfortunately, we do not have any regulatory agencies who are following this and holding these industries accountable, because they take advantage of the fact that they can buy a politician. And, here in the state of Texas, we have politicians who are in the pockets of industry. Our governor appoints people from the energy industry to these same regulatory agencies. So you have what we say in America, like the fox is guarding the hen house. They're not going to write any laws that's going to harm their bottom line, which is their profits. So the community is being exposed to this, and we are not being told that this is what's being emitted into the air. Most recently in June, Cheniere LNG was requesting to increase their air permit and how much pollution they're able to emit. And they held a community meeting, and in that community meeting, they didn't disclose this to the community. They didn't let us know that they were seeking to increase how much contaminants they release into the environment. What they shared with us was how much money they donated to different community organizations, how many parks they built, how they purchased radio systems for the local fire and police departments, and also, you know, how many volunteer hours their employees have contributed to the community and how much money they've donated to the food bank. Nothing regarding how much this is impacting our health. And this facility was built, it was given, you know, a lot of its fast-tracked approvals during the Trump administration, which didn't, you know, the Environmental Protection Agency did not do anything to ensure that communities weren't not going to be harmed. So this is an environmental justice issue. And right now there was conversations in the Inflation Reduction Act, you know, that they were going to pass a methane fee. And we know that sounds promising, that it was going to help, you know, bring down how much methane we emit into the atmosphere, but that methane fee it's only going to hold some of the top polluters accountable. They're saying they're going to assist them by providing like financial assistance, and the fees are pretty comical when you see like how much profits have been made. They start off at $900 in 2024 for every metric ton of methane that gets emitted. And then it increases to $1,200 in 2025. And then after 2026, it's capped at $1,500 for every metric ton of methane that these facilities emit. But it's only the top facilities that are, you know, have to report to the EPA. It doesn't take into account all of the small fracking facilities. And here in this state, there are hundreds of small fracking facilities, you know, and businesses who pretty much once they're done with a wellhead, they just walk away. They don't have to cap it. So that is left up to the taxpayers to go and cap a lot of these wells. And right now we have thousands of orphaned wells that we are trying to cap. So they say this methane fee is going to help slow global warming. When at the Permian Basin alone, like there's enough methane released to power 2 million homes. And, you know, they're now saying, well, we're going to pass carbon capture, storage and utilization and hydrogen. We're going to solve this crisis by, you know, bringing in these two things. When carbon capture, utilization and storage, it's one, an unproven method, and two, they haven't made promises that they're going to use the carbon that is captured and they're going to actually store it. That hasn't been a guarantee. So what we have been told is that it's more than likely going to be used for enhanced oil recovery. So taxpayers are going to be paying for the system that is supposed to cap methane or help capture methane, but they're actually going to use the captured carbon to re-inject it back into these wells so that they can get every last drop of oil and gas from these wells. And so further increasing how much methane is emitted into the atmosphere. It's, you know, and then also putting that tax on us as taxpayers. Like recently we did a study, some of our partners did an auto case report, and they found for every job that these facilities promise that they're going to create, it's $4.1 million, or in euros, it's 4,216,505 euros for every job that these industries create. So you're basically paying for these facilities to come into your communities and poison your air, to use your water and expose you to these cancerous contaminants. And right now, like we have Corpus Christi LNG, which is currently undergoing stage 3, but on this map, you will see all of the proposed LNG facilities. Some are currently under construction and others are still going through the permitting stages. And unfortunately, some of these facilities were built when the community didn't know too much about LNG. So we are sharing our experience of what we went through in hopes that you take this information and you go into your communities and you share this, that this isn't going to solve your crisis. This is going to bring more problems than it's going to help with. And it's going to expose the community to long-term risks to your health, to your environment, to your water. And, you know, I don't know if y'all are familiar with bed bugs, but once you have one in your community, it's going to be very, very hard to, you know, get them out because they will expand, you know, immediately. Like it's, and so you as members of your country, as citizens of your country, you know, please talk to your politicians and ask them to stand up for you. And we are sharing what we know, what we have been exposed to, what we have, you know, because we're going through this and it's very difficult for us. It's an environmental justice issue. And although President Biden said that he was going to take the concerns of our communities into account when permitting this, when the war in Ukraine happened, he gave Cheniere LNG the permission to increase its exports despite the concerns from our communities. So it is an environmental justice issue. It is continued colonization. It is impacting our health. And, you know, we all need to come together if we're really going to save our planet, because we have to work together on this. And so these are some sources of interest, you know, so you can get more information on the maps. There's a Permian climate bomb that has a video on fracking in the Permian Basin. Texas methane hunters have started a YouTube channel where they go and they track a lot of these facilities. They look at storage tanks where you would think there is nothing being emitted into the air, and they use infrared cameras and they're capturing tons of methane being emitted into the atmosphere that is not visible to the naked eye. So please evaluate like the project's impact to your environment, to your health and your community, because LNG is not the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elida. And I think it was a very, very strong and also, if I may say so, touching story what you just shared with us. And it fits very well with the webinar which we did on Monday, because I'm having a methane week, so to speak, with a lot of webinars. And the webinar which we did on Monday was actually about climate racism, meaning that not only the climate crisis is much more vicious to vulnerable people in the global south, but also that the exploitation of fossil fuels is colonialism, neo-colonialism, and also on the back of the most vulnerable in the US, but of course also in the global south. And I had a very interesting webinar, unfortunately in German, else I would invite you to watch it, with a sociologist who is working on the narrative of the right and the far right parties that are actively working against the energy transition, and what's behind this, well, behind this Weltbild, we say in German, the view on the world and on races and on the value of people. Thank you very much for sharing. And now I would like to pass the floor to James. Oh, I speak in English, sorry. And we already have a plethora of questions. Thank you, James, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Elida. Thank you, Jutta. Thank you, Andy. Let me start this sharing here. My name is James HIATT. I am from Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is, Louisiana is shaped, is right next to Texas, is shaped like a boot. Lake Charles is in the heel of the boot. Maybe you know about New Orleans, it's over near the toe of the boot. So I'm a former refinery operator. I worked in an oil refinery as an operator and as a lab analyst for nearly a decade. And now I've come to this work because, you know, the truth of the matter is it's been our collective dependence on these fossil fuels that has got us into this situation. And it will take our collective, both sides, all of us together to shift into something new. Lake Charles is what is being termed as the epicenter of the U.S. Natural gas LNG export. We have our first terminal, Andy, was also built in 1979, 1980 as an import facility. It's right here. It's called Lake Charles LNG. At the time was another name. In 2008, 2009, they built Cameron LNG and also another one over here that you can't quite see, Sabine Pass, which is a Cheniere facility. These were built for import because at the time we had not started fracking. And so we were trying to get our energy independence by importing. This is an updated map from Healthy Gulf, some of our community partners working against this. Lake Charles is here, and in Southwest Louisiana, we now have 3 out of the 8 export facilities. We export out of Southwest Louisiana over 51% of the LNG that is coming out of this country. As you can see, we also have 8 additional proposed facilities just in my area to bring a total of over 10 just right here in this part of the world. And there's even more. There's some floating offshore floating terminals that are proposed, and some of them are even permitted. So we did not have to have a fast track for the permitting for these facilities because the gas companies have been planning this since 2015. It's not a permitting issue on our side. What's happening is that the money is not there because we have not had a huge demand to make all of these facilities until we end up with this Ukrainian crisis here just earlier this year. And you know, my heart is with all of Europe and with Ukraine, because what we're doing here is marching down a suicidal road of continued fossil fuel dependency. None of these facilities that are not already constructed or under construction will be built within the next 3 or 4 years. All of these facilities that are in red have not been built and will take a minimum of 3 years to be built. So nothing can help this winter or next winter or the winter after that. I think one of the biggest, you know, falsehoods and narratives that is being pushed is that this, on our side, this natural gas will be used to heat homes and provide electricity for our allies in Europe. The truth of the matter is most of this gas is wanted to be used into produce plastics, and not just for heating and for producing electricity. Where does the natural gas come from in the United States? This is just a show of the shale, S-H-A-L-E, where the gas is being fracked from. You can see that the Permian Basin is very large, and this is where a multitude of majority of the gas is coming from. Also in Louisiana, up here is Haynesville, and since 2011, the number of pipelines that have crisscrossed Texas to get to this Gulf Coast so we can export this fracked gas has grown exponentially. What we're talking about here is an area that is already full of petrochemicals. I worked at a refinery. My father worked at a refinery to turn oil into gas and diesel and jet fuel. Recently, we've expanded and we're trying to make more and more plastic out of this oil and gas. And that's what we're seeing. In 2020, actually today, let me start with today. Today, right now, at this very moment, a category 4 or 5 hurricane is slamming into Florida. My heart goes with those people because I know what it's like to have to rebuild. I know what it's like to have to be on the front lines of a climate catastrophe, to see stronger and more severe storms, more frequent storms. coming to your community and just wreak havoc. In 2020, well, I'll start in 2005. We suffered from Hurricane Katrina, which wiped out New Orleans. Also in my side of the state, which is not well known, Hurricane Rita, about a month later, wrecked Lake Charles. In 2020, we went through Hurricane Laura and Hurricane Delta, 6 weeks apart. These are Category 4, some of the strongest storms to ever hit Louisiana. My community is still reeling from this. We are still recovering. There are people still living with tarps in their houses in conditions you would not believe. What we are seeing is the same thing on your side, where because of this crisis in Ukraine, the massive amount of exports that we are providing is causing electricity bills to go up, causing food prices to go up. So it's an environmental justice issue, and it's an economic injustice issue, because the people who are on fixed and low income cannot afford to pay for their electricity bills or their food because of our dependency on natural gas and fossil fuels. So this is just the record of hurricanes in the last 15 years. I grew up in Louisiana and Lake Charles, and between 1980 and 2005, in 25 years, there was one storm. And it went through Lafayette, New Iberia, which is about an hour away. Since 2005, the number of storms that have, not just Louisiana, this is focused on Louisiana because it's where I'm from, but throughout Texas, I can rattle off all the Rita, Katrina, Ike, Gustav, Harvey, Ida, Delta, Rita, I'm sorry, Laura. Anyway, it just goes on and on. What are we doing here? You know, the writing is on the wall. We have been walking down this fossil fuel dependent road for too long. And what we're being asked to do is to continue down the road. Well, I promise you, we are on the precipice. We are at the point where we're running out of road to walk down, and we're being asked to just continue, to continue down this road, pay no attention to the writing on the wall. We cannot continue. We are facing this situation purely out of economic and really a greed stance. Obviously, we want the lights to turn on when you flip the switch. We enjoy the comfort of air conditioning and heat. If there was no alternative and the fossil fuels were the only way we could go, how can we provide for our kids, yet we're selling out our grandkids and their kids and their kids? You know, over the last 150 years, we've started down this this dependency on fossil fuels and industrialization, mostly in the global north. And we have affected, basically come to the point where we cannot continue if we want to live on this planet the way that we have been. And if there were no alternatives, if there wasn't renewables, if there wasn't efficiency measures, if there weren't other ways to still enjoy these comforts, we could do, you know, we could say, well, we just have to do what we have to do, but we don't. There are alternatives, and we have got to begin shifting rapidly, not by building more offshore regasification, not by building more export facilities. This is a picture of the newest facility in Calcasieu Pass. Is Venture Global, who has contracts with Europe and with Germany specifically. This is not clean energy. This is not clean. You can see these birds. They promised they would not be flared. They would flare 7 days a year. And the first 3 months they operated, they flared. First 4 months they operated, they flared 84 out of the 120 days. In the middle of a bird migration, this facility is right next to houses where people are living. The shrimpers who are still trying to live off of the land and provide food are being pushed out by these big gas companies. This is that same facility. Look at this flare. This is the one that went on for 84 days. It still flares. What are we doing? This is not clean. We are releasing methane from the wellhead. We are releasing methane through the piping, greenhouse gases, uncombusted hydrocarbons, carcinogens, benzene, toluene. The list goes on and on. These refrigerant trains are dangerous. We saw in June, Freeport LNG had an explosion, which completely took that facility offline. that was a near miss. If one of these tanks were to rupture, this would be a crater. There's no doubt. People, the industry likes to say, "Oh, we're very safe." You've only been safe because you haven't had that many. You keep pushing. You keep coming up against you know, danger and a hazard. There will be accidents that will be catastrophic, and we don't have to do that. We can move in another direction. This is another facility. This is Cameron LNG. These are ground flares. Basically, these are tennis stadium size on the ground flares that will burn the hydrocarbons, the methane. It's absolutely massive. I don't know if you can understand the scale of these things, but to call natural gas, liquefied natural gas, the process of liquefying, extracting, piping, liquefying, transporting across oceans, regasifying, and then transporting to the end user, there's nothing clean about it at all. That is the largest and biggest lie that they've been feeding us for years. Cleaner than coal, maybe marginally. The truth is none of these fossil fuels are clean. The solution has got to be found elsewhere. This is a picture. I just want to, this is a view from we have a casino in Lake Charles, the Golden Nugget. This is what we look out over. These are the refineries and the plastics and the carcinogen combustible facilities that we already have. We are an environmental justice community. We've already spoke about cancer rates and sickness and airborne respiratory illnesses, heart disease. All of this is tied to fossil fuels. We cannot continue going down this road. We have arrived here by thousands and thousands of generations to get to this point in history. And to think that what we do now, our action and our inaction today, matter more than maybe at any other point. If there were no alternatives, you know, what could we do? Put our head down and just go forward. But the truth is there are plenty of alternatives. And to continue down this road is suicidal, and we don't have to do it. And so from my side to your side, we've got to stop these infrastructure build out. The next 20 years is critical to keep the polar ice caps together, to keep families together. We will have to retreat from these coasts already. The promise of continued fossil fuel dependency is more and more suffering for all of us, and especially those most marginalized and living on the margins in the global South and elsewhere. We are responsible for the situation that we are in, and to continue down this is absolutely insanity. So I do appreciate the opportunity to speak, and really we have no regulation in the U.S. on methane. It's an unregulated chemical. The regulation has to come from our collective use and our choices in what we can do to step forward. So again, I appreciate your time. My name is James HIATT at the Louisiana Bucket Brigade, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, James, for sharing your story and your experiences. And I think here again, we see that the rights of the local communities are just plainly ignored. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which state that you have the right for a clean environment and also for access to clean, affordable, reliable energy, which is SDG 7 actually. So this is widely ignored all over the globe, although all states have signed up to fulfilling the SDG agenda until 2030. As I said, we have a lot of questions, which I'm trying to, let's say, arrange a bit, because they, of course, came in a bit weird order. Oh, I wanted to speak German. Sorry. Also, ich versuche gerade so ein bisschen Überblick zu bekommen.
Okay, sorry. I'm just trying to sort through the questions that have come in. Sometimes they are similar, sometimes they don't really relate to what we're talking about today, but I'm going to start with a very controversial question. Someone was asking considering the environmental harm we've seen from James and Elida, the environmental harm caused by fracking in the US, wouldn't it have been better to pursue fracking in Europe or Germany, where we have stricter environmental laws? So just to make sure that we have more emissions here instead of harming communities in the US. Maybe Andy, you can say something to that. Okay, brief answer, of course, no, obviously, because the effects of fracking are still the same. Yes, you can have strict regulations, but if the authorities don't have the staff, if they don't do their job properly, then even in Germany we will have incidents and accidents, and they are happening. I think it was 2 years ago, until 2 years ago, Wintershall issued a statement that for 4 years they didn't notice that millions of liters of toxic water was leaking from their pipes right in the middle of Germany. We have projects in protected areas, even though that's not legal, so the list goes on and on. So even in Germany, the effect would have been having industrialized regions, and even if you don't have any leaks, no methane emissions, even just the water consumption would have created competition with agriculture. And especially considering the droughts we are having, that's really dangerous. So definitely no. But what we should have done in the last 10 years is instead invest in renewables, instead of saying, well, let's do it here and instead import them from the US or the United States or Russia. I think we all agree on that. It would have been a good idea to speed up renewables. There was a lot of investment around 2000 and even until 2012 or so. And then we had Röttgen, Rösler, Altmaier in Germany come into power, who fought against solar power, fought against wind power. So I think people looking back at this in the future will find quite a few interesting things in the government documents. I'm sure there will be interesting discoveries, but maybe that'll be soon, far in the future when we're gone. But that might be really interesting. We got an interesting question from Peter. Despite the value of natural gas, why are we burning it off so much? And I've been wondering that as well, because the United Nations and their global methane assessment find that more than half of emissions created by oil and gas extraction and the industry at no extra cost could have been avoided, because every molecule that you're not burning off, you can sell. So I'm actually wondering that as well. And I haven't really gotten anyone to answer that question for me. And it's especially important now with the high costs involved, which means that you can refinance your investments very quickly. Maybe James knows more about that? I don't know.
Yeah, I can speak a little to this. It's not so much as a technical failure as it is a unwillingness to invest in this control technology. The best available control technology is a term that's very often used. When they are drilling to find these, and in putting the water in that will that fractures the shell and releases this gas, there's no like dome over this whole area. You know, this gas will seep up through that, and to capture it in a way that captures all of that what got fractured that's not what happened. So about 10%, at least 10% is what's lost at the wellhead. There's there's some kind of technical costlier way to drill this well or to frack, but what happens is they don't get that much out of each one, so they have to make a lot of sites. That's why that map of Odessa was so scarred up, because it's not like you're getting a lot. You can drill one time and now you hit the pocket and you can get all the gas from there. It takes a lot of drilling in a lot of pockets, a lot of fracking to get to the gas. So that's one part. The other part is just in pipelines, pressure differences. You will have leaks at flanges. You will have leaks. You will have overpressuring, temperature gauges. So there's the pressure relief valve, which will also let off, so the pipe will not explode. And then at the terminal, you have an issue. They're supposed to be trying to capture the gas that would boil off and re-liquefy it, but many times it's actually cheaper just to burn it, which is hard to believe, but this is the truth. So maybe Andy can speak some more to that, but that's as far as this much as I know. So.
Andy, kannst du was dazu sagen?
Andy, do you have anything to add? I agree. That's what I've learned over the years. It does seem to be the case. They are just not willing to make those investments, so they burn it off instead. They flare it. Or there's technical issues. It's just technically difficult. It's more complicated. It's very sophisticated to avoid flaring. Maybe Elida can say something.
Yeah, well, James touched on it. Yeah, it is cheaper still for them to flare it. And here it's really difficult to keep track of why, because industries self-report when there's any incidents, and when they're undergoing maintenance or if there's an emergency, they're able to flare, as long as they want. So it's really difficult to track what the reasons are why, but it's been cheaper for them to just burn off this gas, and since they'd faced no fines really for allowing the methane to leak into the air, there's really no incentive for them to do any different. And just like with Cheniere, they were trying to get the EPA to they didn't want to cap their emissions, and so they were trying to get the EPA to agree to allow them to emit as much as possible, because even though this law had been in the books since 2002, they still built their terminals based on old outdated technology because it was cheaper for them. And now that they have to update it, they are asking the EPA to waive, their need to follow this regulation, and the EPA denied that request. So we're happy about that. And it took community efforts, but yeah, it's because it's cheaper.
Okay, fascinating. Actually, I wouldn't have thought it, actually, because as I said, especially at the moment with those sky-high prices, I would have thought that this investment would pay back pretty quickly, actually. Oh, switching to English again. Sorry about this. Yeah.
Okay, we have another interesting question to Elida and James as well. Uwe asks, isn't fracking an issue in the elections? Is everyone happy with the situation as it is? Do they not care? Why is nobody talking about it during the elections?
That is a good question, but we have this notion of energy independence, and we need to supply energy to the rest of the world. And so people have been, they have it in their mind that we need to depend on fossil fuel infrastructure and these fossil fuel companies for our survival. And so even though people have brought it up in the election, you still have many supporters on both sides who are influenced by the fossil fuel industry. And, we as citizens have been made dependent on fossil fuels. So, they try to make the alternative as something that isn't feasible, that it's going to be too expensive, that it's going to impact the environment. And unfortunately, you still have people who buy into that notion. So, that's our work, as Chispa and other community organizations, is we're trying to educate the community and give them all the information that hasn't been disclosed to us, and make like this whole being transparent, because unfortunately, misinformation has been the bread and butter of the fossil fuel industry. So
Ja, es ist auch so ein bisschen meine Erfahrung, wie ich
That's similar to my experience on Twitter, actually. I use Twitter regularly and I talk about renewables, energy efficiency, energy transition, methane emissions. And a lot of people from the US keep saying 100% renewables is impossible. So for the European Union, we have a study by a Finnish university, and they calculated. We have hourly data, so it's not just a quick thing. We have real weather data. We have data for an hourly basis, and it says yes, it is possible. It's feasible. Of course, it requires investments. It costs money, but those are investments because we save money on imports. And they calculated it's possible by 2040 to convert our entire system to 100% renewables with natural storage solutions, a low proportion, low share of hydrogen, and they even included drinking water. Because especially in the southern European countries, the water supply is at risk, is going to be at risk in the next decades. And in terms of cost and prices, it's going to be the same as 2020, not the 2022 level. So not the current price level, it's going to be the 2020 price level. So it's not an economical question, it's a question of political will. And Mark Jacobson from Stanford has done the same calculations for the United States, and it is feasible. I think there was another question from the audience, but I can't find it right now. There was a question to James. As far as I know, Texas has quite a high number of wind turbines that produce power, so we are not fully dependent on fossil fuels. How does the population feel about those? Do they accept them, or are they skeptical?
That question is probably really for Elida. She's in Texas.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. In Louisiana, what we have is doubled down on fossil fuels. Our electricity is 70% generated by natural gas, and the rest by coal. And we have very little solar and very little wind. So we are not even started marching in the right direction. We are in the still sitting in the dependent fossil fuel situation. So.
Yes, and I can answer that. We have wind farms all around my community, and it just depends on your political beliefs and your ideologies. People who believe a certain way want more renewables, and you have people who are upset more at the wind turbines and that they mess up their skyline versus things like ExxonMobil Sabic and Cheniere, the flare from there. They get angry more at the wind turbines than they do at these flares. So it's still, it's just how it's painted politically. And, in Texas, we suffered Winter Storm Uri last year. We were not prepared for it. And, our power grid went down, and our power grid is mostly powered by natural gas and fossil fuels. And our governor tried to blame renewables on us not having electricity. And they said because wind turbines froze over, that people suffered when the majority of our power grid is powered by fossil fuels, which pipelines froze, and there was a lot of disaster. So it just depends on your political beliefs still.
Ja, in dem Zusammenhang.
Right. I need to tell the story again. I've told it before. My hometown, my home region in Rhineland-Palatinate has a region which is very progressive in terms of renewables, especially wind power. And the local governor, if you will, he's very conservative. But the way he convinced people, the way he got them on board is by saying, it's an opportunity for our region. We are poor. We're a poor region. If we found a society to build these wind turbines, our communities will benefit. they can earn money. And that's how he got people on board. They might say, well, it doesn't look nice, it's not pretty. But thanks to the wind turbine, we can afford another kindergarten, or that one means that we have more buses running. So gaining acceptance means explaining how people can benefit. I think maybe it's a very German phenomenon. We have these energy cooperatives for citizens where people can buy in together, they invest in wind parks together and wind farms, and that gets people on board as well, allowing them to participate. And maybe that could be something for the US as well, because that would be a way to create a fair transition for everyone to participate in the benefits as well. And its current issue, which is why I'd like to talk about Nord Stream and the leaks, which is maybe not as relevant to our guests from the United States, but it's a very big issue for us today. And I've tried to combine the questions that came in on that subject. So first, how bad is the methane leak on Nord Stream 1 and 2? Can it be repaired? Just to give you an idea, Greenpeace calculated roughly how many cubic meters of gas leaked. So if everything escapes from the pipelines, not everything will go into the atmosphere, but if everything did, it would be about 4% of Germany's annual greenhouse gas emissions, just boiling out of the ocean. Should we flare it? That's another question, and that's a technical question. I'm not sure if you can burn it off. Maybe our speakers know more about that? Is it possible? It's a huge, if you've seen the pictures, it's like a kilometer long, bubbles coming out of the ocean.
I'm sure you could burn it, but that would be a huge fire, and you're just converting methane into CO2. That's definitely not the solution short term. Then you have to worry about how to put this out. So yeah, it's a rock and a hard place for sure.
Ja, es wird ja ohnehin zu CO2. Ne?
I mean, it's going to turn into CO2 anyway. Even if it's released without burning it off, it will be converted, it will be split up at some point, so it turns into carbon dioxide anyways. You're just skipping that phase, that methane phase. And we've got another question. How do you feel about people saying it might have been sabotage? So based on what I've been reading, I think there's really no other explanation than it being sabotage. Having 3 leaks in such a short time in 3 different locations, and really big leaks, they are huge. There's really no way that's an accident or a natural occurrence. There's lots of conspiracy theories going around on Twitter. Who caused it? Who did it? Some people say Ukraine, Russia, USA as the culprit. I don't know if we'll ever find out. Andy? Yeah, I didn't want to participate in the conspiracy theories, but I wanted to point out that the Federal Environmental Office says there's 0.3 billion of methane, but they are using that factor of 25, which is obsolete. We know that. And that's not the current value. That's not up-to-date information. So if you multiply that estimate with 25, you get a completely different quantity. So over 20 years, on average, it's about 83. And again, multiplying that by 83 instead of 25, that gets you a completely different result. And that number is still being used for climate models. And that hides how dangerous methane really is.
Von Greenpeace und Umwelthilfe.
Yeah, absolutely right. The 4% named by Greenpeace. Yes, so that's the Greenpeace value, and they know what they're talking about. So they don't use the 25 factor. I trust them. Let me just check the other questions. Oh, there are far too many questions for me to hand them to you, but this one is really interesting, Andy. The chemical industry looks into pyrolysis to get turquoise hydrogen. How does it link to LNG? Well, that goes without saying that we need to be careful when it comes to colors of hydrogen, of course. Everything that is based on LNG, of course, is not green or clean hydrogen. I mean, even when we call something green hydrogen, we must be careful. First, there are only few areas where green hydrogen can be produced. That's very often in Namibia and other areas in the global south. And then we need to talk about new colonization again. So why should the global south produce green hydrogen for the global north? And but we haven't started talking about it. We talk about infrastructure for fossil fuels, but we're not talking about infrastructure for green hydrogen, and we haven't talked about the users and who should be the users. But that's a debate that is important because it's not just about pipelines and an LNG terminal. If I build the same infrastructure for 100% hydrogen, I should use the pipeline network. So, but then to use, for example, hydrogen for heating, that is nonsense. So we need to ask the right questions. But coming back to your question, again, we need to be very careful if LNG is used and people try to use it to greenwash solutions. Yes, exactly. So often people say they build hydrogen ready, but the liquefaction temperatures differ. I mean, hydrogen is the lightest gas we have and requires deeper temperatures in order to liquefy. So it is very difficult to build hydrogen ready installations. I've heard different things with regards to pipelines. There might be some solutions, and I'm cautious here. Nevertheless, I am fully with you. We must be careful that we don't get to the next problem immediately. Let's have a look at one more question because many listeners have asked something similar. I think you just spoke about the imports. Hang on. Yes, so how about the new dependencies and the loss when LNG is transported? I mean, everybody says LNG imports are great. We get 100% of what has been produced and we'll receive the entire amount. But this, of course, is not the case. We know that just if you believe or if you know physical laws, whenever you convert substance, there is a loss. And people tend to forget that when dreaming of getting LNG or hydrogen from Namibia or Chile. But again, how much are we dependent when it comes to renewable energies? Let's say China says we're not going to export solar panels, then we'll have a problem too. Our goals will then not be achievable anymore. So instead of the hydrogen hype, we need to do something else. We need a hype for energy supply of renewable energy. And then many others touched up on efficiency issues. I mean, the cheapest energy, the cheapest power is the power we don't use. And sustainability, I mean, if we can replace fossil fuels by just being more efficient, we don't need new wind turbines. So I believe there's a lot to be done. And every day in the European Parliament, I work on that. So it's 8:20, and I'd like to hand over the word to my panelists, 2 to 3 minutes, and then I'm going to speak about the methane regulation in the European Parliament in the end. But now we turn around the series. James, you have the floor for your final statement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again so much. The main point I want to really drive home is that there are alternatives. Nothing that we would build on this side would be ready for several years, and nothing that would be built on the import side would be ready for several years. In that same time, we could be moving towards this renewable and also the efficiency measures that are I'm afraid will become very familiar shortly. We don't have that much time left to make the shift. I really believe that if you care for your neighbor, if you love your neighbor in Germany and across the ocean here, our future depends on what we're going to do. And we've got to do something for our children and the grandchildren. We are too far along this path to be debating whether or not we can continue. We know we can't. The writing's on the wall. Let's move in a way that expedites what we know is a solution and not continue down this destructive path. Thank you again so much for the opportunity to speak, and my hearts are with you all.
Thank you for this powerful statement, and thanks for being with us. Elida.
Yes, thank you so much for allowing us to be here. And we understand the difficulty of the decision that Europe is under. It's a position that nobody should ever be in. And that's why we really need to look at what the alternatives are. You know, if we really want true energy independence, you don't have to rely on other countries for wind energy. You don't have to rely on other countries for solar energy. You know, we can really make investments. And if the German government is willing to fund these LNG facilities, they should really be investing in the people and helping them to weatherize their homes, to help, you know, find alternative solutions to provide heat and energy for their homes. Something that was really impactful to me was when I went to Germany. I honestly didn't think about if I could drink the water from the tap or not. I opened up the tap and drank it, and that's a situation that we don't have here. We question the quality of water from our tap because of all the contaminants in our water. So don't put yourself in the situation. Find alternatives. And, you know, this is only going to get bigger if we don't stop it now. And if we really want to fight for the planet, the time that we have is, you know, we don't have as much time as we think we do. So right now we are at a moment of transition, and we really have to make that decision of where we want to make that investment. So thank you so much for, you know, being on this call, from hearing from us, and we appreciate being able to share this because not very many people have this opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Elida, for sharing your views with us, because for us in Europe, as I have read out this question, well, why don't we do fracking over here? Because it's so bad in the US, and but actually it wouldn't be much better here, because of course the risk for our water supply would be exactly the same. So it doesn't make it any better if we do it at home. But of course that doesn't mean, oh, we should do it over in the US, but we should really work all to end fossil fuels in the US and also in Europe. And of course, try to make for example, the African continent leapfrog the fossil phase instead of exploring new oil and gas in their countries. Andy, du hast auch noch 2 Minuten, bitte.
Andy, over to you. 2 minutes for you. People have already said so much, but maybe this last appeal to our audience now and later on YouTube. Make sure you are interested. Don't believe everything, and don't get bogged down by fear that we need the new infrastructure, otherwise we'd lose our prosperity, our wealth. Not everything is true. Just be aware of the fact that we are seeing a unique point in history, and we need to seize the opportunities to push for a radical turnaround. And everybody can get involved, but not as individuals. Also, when we are on board together, if we work together across the Atlantic, and I believe this has been highlighted time and again, if we are passive, if we don't do anything, everybody will have a negative impact on this planet. Therefore, we need to stand together, and we need to make sure that people here in Europe learn about the fates all over the world. And then we need to ask our politicians, ask them, do you really not care what's happening elsewhere? Yeah, this is my final statement to all of you out there. Thank you, Andy. And yes, all of this can change politics. I still remember there was one large conference where we had politicians from Colombia, and it was a shareholders meeting of RWE. And yes, it makes a difference. So your work, all activists' work is important. Now on the methane regulation. In the European Parliament, we speak about the methane regulation in the energy sector. The Commission has already put, let's say, some effort into it, but there's still room for improvement. What is it about? It is about the fact that flaring should be prohibited, methane should not be emitted, and leaks must be continuously looked for and immediately repaired. It is a very technical regulation. There are lots of units and ppms and periods and so on. On the other hand, there is one big thing I'm working on, and I'm working for some majorities here. I'm pushing for some majorities here because I want that this regulation also applies to our imports. Of course, not just the day after tomorrow, but that there will be a deadline. And after the deadline, the regulation is sought to apply to our imports too. I'm now pretty frank because I fear against the current parliament with the Greens fraction of just 10%. It's going to be very difficult. On the other hand, I hope that we'll achieve a labeling, meaning that in the end, the Commission says if there is solid data by 2025, there's a solid database, and then that the Commission says, all right, these imports are below 0.2% of methane. It's the best we can get at the moment. So they will get a label, afterwards B label, and so on. The sort of a classification that helps people to make a choice. And being a politician that I am, but also citizens and companies will have a choice and can say, why are you buying methane that is labeled E? We have corporate social responsibility policies here, a sustainability agenda. We don't want you to buy energy that is, or methane that is labeled with an E. So this might be one path. So we need to offer people the chance to make informed decisions, but we cannot work, or we cannot solve these problems alone. I'm working on it. I put a lot of effort. I have some allies, yet it is a very complex topic. Yet I'd like to thank you now. I'd like to say thank you to my panelists. Thank you to my organizing team. Thank you for inviting everybody, for setting up everything. You have done a great job. Thank you to our interpreters who have been translating for more than an hour. I know that simultaneous translation is really important, especially if people don't speak slowly. I'm not an exception here. And of course, thank you to our great audience who has been with us for 90 minutes. We have recorded the webinar, so if you're interested, you can tune in again. In a couple of days, we will upload it so you can re-watch it in German or English. You can also recommend it to your friends or politicians or decision makers. It's always worthwhile. And yes, there are quite a number of webinars. They are all linked on my website, so feel free to check out the list too. And tomorrow there will be another webinar within the framework of the Methane Week, and it is Brazil in the run-up to the elections. Is it an opportunity for our climate? Because a third of methane emissions comes from the energy sector, but another third comes from agriculture. And cattle, for example, is a very large source of this emission. And Brazil, being one of the largest producers of beef and also soybeans that is fed to cattle, plays a key role. And that's not all, of course, because of the logging in the Amazon and drying the wetlands, there are additional emissions. Thus, tune in tomorrow. Tomorrow will be in German and Portuguese. Sorry, I'm not going to speak Portuguese because I don't speak Portuguese, but there will be translation too. So if you're interested, tune in tomorrow, and let me thank you again. Enjoy your evening and goodbye. Thank you for listening.